Cinderella and I met for the first time in Westmont, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago in 2001. At least I think this is the first time we met. I can't really remember. My sister and I were over at our neighbor's apartment to play dress up and watch Cinderella. Three giggly little kids running up and down stairs, digging through boxes of costumes, tossing everything around like a montage movie scene, dresses, wigs, shoes, props, anything you could desire, until we finally settled on the perfect outfits. As you can see by the picture over there, I was in fact serving. Hands on my hips, strutting with my little frilly blue slip dress, black high heels, red lipstick, and a curly blonde wig. My sister and our friend also showed out in full fits. Dresses, makeup, tiaras, glitter, all of it. What more could you need? We ran back downstairs to the living room as fast as we could and sat down on the couch. The beautifully animated world of Cinderella began to fill the dimly lit room with a cool blue light. The box TV and the VHS provided a soft background hum as we sang "A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes," probably very off-key. The Garland family is not known for our vocals. For the next hour and 14 minutes, the fairy tale world of talking mice, fairy godmothers, pumpkin carriages, princes, and princesses had now just entered our world, turning this Midwest apartment, if only temporarily, into a queer space of magic and wonder. Now, I must confess that if you came to this talk in search of answers, explanations, or conclusions, there aren't any to be found here. Rather, what follows is more like a meandering list of questions. Basically, what goes on in my head all day, every day. The only thing I have become 100% certain about, and I have never been more certain about anything in my life, is that Cinderella is trans. It has become undeniably true to me. Everything else that I will discuss is part fact, part fiction. It is both being in and of the world we live in now, and imagining the places we could go. It is doors, openings, and ways out of this terrible regime of sexual difference we have found ourselves in. It is an escape plan, a shovel, a hole behind a poster. It is a hope that maybe someday soon you too can escape with me. There are really never any concrete answers to who we are, just endless possibilities for who we can become. And becoming is a never-ending process with no static start point, end point, climax, or narrative. Becoming is an act of resistance. It's a defiance of the ingrained social order, of normalcy, of assumed linearity or progress. It is about allowing and reading more multiplicities of the impersonal and of the imperceptible. Every choice we make consciously or subconsciously to step off the path of compulsory cis heterosexuality leads us into deeper realms of the imperceptible and uncertain. Here in these realms, nothing is known, but everything becomes possible. The straight and narrow path we are conditioned into reveals itself as nothing more than an illusion, a construction, a socially ingrained affective state that we have normalized. Stepping off this path provides a fresh line of inquiry for concerns about representation, agency, and sexuality. This is what L.H. Stallings would call trans aesthetics, where we begin to tap into a spiritual force that exceeds identity and subjectivity. A trans force always assuming different forms. Here, beyond subjectivity, transness operates as a movement with no clear origin and no point of arrival, and a political approach that questions, disrupts, and transforms dominant ideas about what is normal or what has been normalized. In developing this project, Cinderella and I jumped together headfirst into this force to co-imagine what it can teach us about transness as magic, care, interspecies relation, pleasure, and spirituality. The resulting space became an amalgamation of shared desire, community support, thinking through safety and comfort, and the development of imaginative spaces within and beyond our current structures. In Cinderella and I's T for T love story, it was our act of renouncing our supposed natural malehood or womanhood that granted us the possibility to go anywhere, to be anything. We found our way out, riding off into the sunset in a pumpkin carriage. And you know, They say that the life of a transsexual is one of danger, of violence, and of social ostracism. But if there's anything I can tell you today, it's one of the most beautiful, magical, and special things I have ever done. It's certainly been easier than going to grad school. To restate my favorite Paul Preciado quote, all the things that are terrible and terrifying about transsexuality and gender transition are not found in the process of transition itself, but in the way in which the boundaries between the sexes punish and threaten to kill anyone who dares cross them. It is not gender transitioning that is horrifying and dangerous, but the regime of sexual difference. Beginning transitioning has brought me into community with some of the most caring, kind, and supportive people I could have ever imagined. This is why I very explicitly and intentionally am always naming the people who help make this show possible. Without their love and support, I would not be here. Transitioning while in grad school has shown me very clearly that the knowledge we call normative, objective, and therefore universal is not only or simply a fiction or construct, it is a mechanism of power, a force that imposes a particular kind of regime of truth on those who they lie about, who are said to have no knowledge to counter the lie. And when we do challenge those lies, we are silenced or said to be untrue. The university remains the primary battleground for where these mechanisms of power are forcefully maintained, developed, and replicated. In many ways, this whole process of developing a thesis and transitioning has made me feel a deep empathy for Red Peter in Kafka's A Report for an Academy. Making my way out of the cage of normal, naturalized sex has presented a secondary cage of commodification and exploitation, whereby my presence at the school is translated into a commodifiable asset that can be leveraged by the School of Art and Art History for its own marketability, which is a complicated place to rest, especially in a state and under an administration that is so violently and openly anti-trans. Of Red Peter, the Academy might have said, "See, although he came here captured and abused, he found his way out through our knowledge. We saved him from the life of being a beast." The whole time blissfully unaware that the knowledge they supposedly provided is the same knowledge that made conditions for his capture and abuse possible. The same is entirely true here. The university system will always replicate the same violent structures it was founded on. Just like the signs we had to hand correct with my actual pronouns perfectly illustrates. Like Paul, I too can hear the giggles and see the eye rolls when I stand up and proclaim my womanhood, or ask if there are any trans or non-binary faculty or staff in the building. Yet, despite all this, I in no way envy the life of being cisgender, or remaining entirely unaware of my own constructed nature. This false sense of safety and security is only made possible through the violence and exploitation of non-white and gender non-conforming folks, many of whom are the ones left patching the holes, fixing the mistakes, and protecting each other. The Undercommons is always flourishing with activity and beauty, while the university continues to passively reap the rewards. I can't lie, it was incredibly difficult for me to put this show together in this horrific place. Inside its walls filled with death and decay, I didn't want to do it. I felt and still feel it holds no space for me. However, the more time I spent with Cinderella, the more I learned what it truly means to remain dedicated to a dream of happiness. I found a way to make a home within this sick and cursed palace. I brought in furniture to help me relax, speakers so I could sing songs at the top of my lungs or have little dance parties, and books to help me escape. I covered the suffocating white walls with colors and patterns borrowed from the spaces where I felt safe, specifically my bedroom in my grandmother's house. Like Cinderella, I too found comfort and solidarity with my non-human companions, like my monstera over there in the corner. Together, through all 3 years, we nourished each other and found ways to flourish, grow, and take up space. We gave each other breath and life. Here, under these foundations, I dug tunnels, escape routes, with my friends, comrades, and co-conspirators. You can find entrances to these tunnels if you look closely enough at the details around you. Many of you in this room help dig those tunnels. Tunnels that provide temporary refuge from the harsh world that exists around them. I wanted to queer the space, to utilize alternative entryways and create windows, doors, and pathways that might lead us into worlds of magic and wonder. I wanted the space to be one where time slips and does those deviant things it's not supposed to do, like move backward, lunge forward, loop, jump, stack, stop, pause, linger, elongate, and pulsate. Memory then became the site where failing, losing, forgetting, unmaking, undoing, unbecoming, and not knowing provide the productive forces for inventing an elsewhere. An elsewhere that walks the fine line between reality and imagination, where we can begin to question the impermanence of what we believe to be permanent. I set out to do the impossible task of imagining a world that exists beyond the violence upon which our current one is founded. Because as Eric Stanley writes, impossibility may very well be our only possibility. Thinking through impossibility is not easy. We may need to squint, to strain our vision, and force to see otherwise, beyond the limited vista of the here and now. Yet it is entirely necessary for our escape out of this hell we call modernity. When we begin to think, love, and move within these frameworks, what becomes important and primary is finding better ways of caring for one another's livelihood, and by extension, cultivating the conditions that can lovingly accommodate such livelihoods. My friend Doe told me the other day that trans people represent the indicator species of society, that because we are constantly under attack and not allowed to thrive, the ecosystem is imbalanced and might not survive. I've been thinking about that a lot. In the end, all I wanted, regardless of the university, regardless of the outcome of this defense, regardless of Florida state politics, was to activate a space for queer and trans people to feel love and to cultivate the conditions for imagining a world where we are not constantly trying to survive, but where we are allowed to thrive. It's a big ask, I know, but throughout the few weeks it's been up, I've seen it and I've experienced it. Sitting here with many of you, screening the film, eating Krishna, painting the walls, and being silly little goofballs, I saw that this is entirely possible if we try. I hope you know how much that means to me.
Where are we going today?
We are checking out what has to be, in my opinion, the worst graduate installation that I've ever seen. But it also happens to be the best because I haven't seen it.
Whose installation is it?
This is Bren Garland's. My friends.
Oh, yay.
Installation, baby.
I'm Bren Garland. I've been saying like non-binary trans femme. I think that's like what is like fitting right now. And then I use like she, they pronouns. I would consider myself like, I guess in this context I'm like an artist. I think that word's gross, so I would say just like maker or like curator of space. So
Amazing. Thank you.
a lot of the like design elements are coming from like aspects of my childhood. So some of it is like, actually I realized like later on, like putting it together, like the color of the walls is really, really close to the color that like my bedroom was when I was a child. And then the wood paneling really comes from like, kind of like what I imagined houses in like this time period when I was growing up were. There was a lot of like wood paneling in like my grandparents' house. My dad's garage had a ton of wood paneling and stuff like that. And so those were always spaces that I kind of felt safe in. And then also like the sliding glass door blinds, like that also comes from my grandma's house as well. Just because that's like such an iconic, I feel like, moment from childhood.
Absolutely.
Being able to like run outside.
Yeah.
And I know I just like when I was making this, I wanted a ton of plants in here. So I like some of these are mine, and then some of them are actually Ellie's
Oh, nice.
that she let me borrow. So, but the Monstera is like mine that has been with me like through the whole 3 years in grad school.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I knew that like she had to be in the show as well because I think it's only fitting. Well, and then there's like the actual living room area, and then basically I was thinking of like this as like a hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that kind of like
definitely-
leads you to the stairs,
Yeah.
and then the stairs like take you up. That's
Yeah.
kind of one of like the escape routes.
Mm-hmm.
Where like yeah, you're able to like sort of like go here and then go up through there.
Mm-hmm.
And the light above it too also is like placed there for that reason too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think like friendship has always been really important to me because there's like I think it's an undervalued like relationship. It's like a thing that we don't think about or like think about putting effort into as much as we think about like romantic relationships.
Yeah.
But I think it takes like the same amount of work and like dedication to like being somebody's friend and like what that means. And so like naming that specifically when I do create like these installations is always like important to me, like shouting out like the people who helped or the people who like make this possible. I mean, it would be impossible to like name everybody because in everything we do in life there's always like a million people that are helping you like along the way. um but yeah, like trying to like always name like the people who do help.
Yeah.
And especially like I mean Alexis like taking the photos.
Yeah, and they're gorgeous.
Yeah,
Gorgeous.
they're
Yeah.
like so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And like her and I also talked about it so much, like the project beforehand, taking the photos, and then we like picked the photos out together, like which ones were gonna go in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I mean she was like such an important part of like how this whole thing came together. And then the same thing with like my friend Ceci who's in the video, like they have been like kind of like my ride or die for this whole past like year and a half really of grad school. And just the conversations that we've had have like challenged me in like really profound ways, like made me think about things so much more like complex and like different, because we've kind of been on like the same path in grad school. And so yeah, like being able to have them in the video and like kind of still showing that process was also like super important. The photos that we picked specifically because they aren't like a portrait. They're more like capturing like a moment. Like both of these, they're like
Yeah.
photos that we felt like both captured what it felt like to be like a kid.
Yeah, definitely. Like they're
Yeah.
super playful, like really fun, like yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like very kid-like.
Mm-hmm.
I do really like the one that I obviously like made the biggest, because I think that one captured the same energy, or like yeah, captured the same energy or spirit as like me in the childhood photo one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mhm.
Hand on the
Yeah.
hip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very like unintentional, but then
Mhm.
ended up like working out so well.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I think it also like ties in the plants. It like works really well like in this space. But I think my favorite photo actually of like the whole set of all of them is me like running up the stairs.
Yeah.
I think like as a photo and also as like it captures like a very specific feeling.
It does.
Yeah, that I think like was so like cool. This whole project started because I actually remembered this moment, but I didn't know we had like
Oh wow.
photographs of it.
Mhm.
Because I was like writing about different like aspects of transness, and then was like reflecting on this memory, and then I ended up going back home, and I was like asking my mom like, don't we have like or do we have like a photo of this like very specific memory that I have?
Mm-hmm.
And then she was like, oh yeah, and then just like went up to like a box, pulled it out, like dug through and like pulled it out so quick. I was like, what the fuck? How do you
Amazing.
know? How do you know where that is? Because in childhood, we don't really have like much concept of like what we're doing, but we're just like doing things that then get like policed or like regulated. So you're the way that you understand yourself is like then formed by other people telling you what you can and can't, like aren't supposed to do.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't really like believe in the idea that like there's like some essential like womanhood or like essential transness like inside of me that like these photos like represent. I think really these photos and like childhood in itself just like represents that possibility for like rediscovering that like sense of play,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
I mean, you talked a little bit about that during your thesis, right? How like there was really no distinction between like you and your sister, like in a gender sense, like in this time, and that it's like the outside influences that I guess took you away from that.
And like I said too, then like I do feel very like very fortunate that like I mean I think my parents like they had us when they were young, so like I think they struggled with other things, but like being creative, like my dad is like an artist, and I think has been around a lot of different people for a long time, so there was never like policing or like regulation in that way on like how we expressed ourselves or like what we played with or like you know things like that. It was just like we were just you know being silly kids and like running around working with him. Like most of the time he was like a working artist during most of this time, and so we would just like go with him to like work on stuff. Yeah. It's definitely very much both, like looking back into the past to then like imagine where it can take us like in the future. Because yeah, like I think like one of my professors on the committee was saying like the installation itself, or maybe he was saying this afterwards, I can't remember, but like walks a fine line between like nostalgia and like this kind of imagined place. Um, so yeah, I was like really trying to like figure out a way where like this place almost becomes this like weird, it's like slightly disorienting in a way, but like purposefully disorienting in that it like takes you out of where like you just were, like being here and like in the hallway, and then you come in here and it's like this totally different world. And that is kind of like what I imagine like it teaching like or like what the process has been like for me is like taking me out of like the present into the past and like into the future. I can't escape this like fucking goo metaphor because I haven't found there's like no better way of explaining like the way I'm thinking about it, because I said it like in a class that I was in like with Ceci and Dr. Hernandez, which is why I was like laughing at talking about the fucking goo again. But it's like it really is like the perfect way of like describing how I think about time,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's like everything is always overlapped like all the time. There's you can't separate yourself from anything. Like you can't separate yourself from the other people or the other things around you. You can't separate yourself from like your past and your future.
Right.
Everything is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that point in the goo is like when you can just focus down on one thing and then like look at it, be like, this is this thing.
But it is cool to me because it feels like when you are able to like center in on that point, you like time becomes less important, I guess. Like you're just existing within that like emotional and physical state, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like I think valuing time less is also something that like is well like in capitalism is like structured around time, and like our current time is like structured around capitalism.
Yeah.
So like in order to like move into a like whatever would exist like beyond this like violent structure is like a devaluing of that like time.
Yeah. I would say like most women like in our society are like so afraid of aging, right? And like of like losing whatever like we've been told we have when we're young and that we don't have when we're old. But like that also is just like like a version of like commodification and like forcing us to you know buy products or like services or whatever. And then I think within that whole process, like we think we're like valuing time, but we're just like continuously like hoping to be somewhere or like sometime where we're not.
I grew up in like a really, really like rural, like small town. So I never really had like queer community. I went to a small undergrad also.
Yeah.
Um, but then actually after that, I ended up moving to LA, and obviously there's like a huge queer population in LA. Or I should say there's like a huge like gay and lesbian like established population.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas like I think then coming to Gainesville, like I got to meet like queer people who embodied like a politics of like queerness that goes beyond like some of kind of the like normative politics of being gay or like being a lesbian, because there is like a sort of like politics to how you navigate those spaces, especially in a place like LA where it's so established. Um, and then so coming here was like the first time where I like actually saw like trans people who like I felt connected to, or like met other queer people who were like thinking about things that I was also thinking about, and who queer people who are also dedicated to like radical politics and like to like liberation. And so I think that that was also like what I gained in Gainesville.
Yeah. Something that like was really like interesting and marking for me when I was in undergrad was I read this book in like a French literature class, and it's called like Moi Tituba Sorcière Noire de Salem. It's like me Tituba Black Witch of Salem. And the concept of the book is that Tituba is like a real person who lived. She was a Barbadian like slave woman. She was like one of the first three women tried in the Salem witch trials. Like the other two women were like white women, and there's like a lot of stuff about them in like the Salem like archives. But for Tituba, there's only like two lines of like things that she said like in court. But this book was written by like a Caribbean author, and she basically like takes those two lines, like what was found in the archive, and like reconstructs like a whole story, like a whole like magical story for Tituba, like where she has like she's able to like commune with spirits, and she's able to like have like this like ancestral knowledge, and she can also like have fun and like be playful with her magic, right? So for me, like I love this idea of like using archives and like like historical images and stories as like a place of like imagination and like reinvention. And I definitely like recognize that here like in your work. So would you like to say anything about that?
Yeah, for sure. Um, it reminds me also of like I think it's called Wayward Lives by Sadia Hartman. It's like very much like this similar a similar like thing, um, because in that like in conversations I've had around that book and like the idea of the archive and like basically doing that, like taking like writing about somebody who historically has been like marginalized and then like not written about, or like because of like so many of these violent structures, and how people get like upset when you do that because they're like, you're constructing like a fake narrative about like this person who was like a real person, whatever. But my like counter argument to that is that everything that you're writing about from an archive is a construction. Like,
Right.
so you don't know the person. Like, even if I were to write about somebody that I knew right now, my writing about them would largely be like a construction of who I think that they are, not like who they think they are,
Right.
you know? And so, like, yeah. So the archive is like always flawed, and I think that that's like something that we should like be more mindful of, is that like we will never know like the inner workings of these lives of people, so why not imagine them as something like powerful and magical and spiritual or whatever, because I think that that provides like more like openings for things, like more ways that we can challenge like things now than like, yeah, than trying to construct like the same narrative for every person like over and over again.
Right.
Or just saying that like we'll never know. Like, I don't think that that's equally as good. Like, just there's nothing about this person, so why should we even like think about them?
Exactly.
Yeah. In the thinking about them, it like is still bringing them like life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah. But like, to bring it back, I guess like what I was doing like in the video, like specifically thinking about like archival work, because I was talking like I had a conversation with some of the undergrads in here, and we were talking about like trans representation like in media, and like specifically archival, what you can find in the archive about like trans people, and largely like trans visual representation, like photographs and like media, like TV, movies, things like that, of trans people is largely based in like these highly produced things like TV shows and talk shows and stuff. And especially if you go back, most of those are like talk show people making, like Jerry Springer's, like something like that, where they're like making fun of trans people. But those trans people are using that space as like a way to reclaim agency, even under circumstances where they're being made fun of. And I think that there's something we can still draw from that, and like still like draw out the magic and like the beauty of like what they were trying to do at that time.
Cinderella is great because like she's so damn famous. Like everyone knows her, you know, and she's like the image of like, I don't know, typical like femininity, I guess, and like, you know, she's like the typical princess. Although I did like love the reminder that we got that like she was actually not interested in like this like romantic like connection with the prince or whatever.
No damsel.
Yeah, she wasn't.
No,
yeah.
And like a lot of the magic in that movie is like through her transformation, like you said. And I think that's a really interesting like concept.
Like the transformation, which like, you know, gives her freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gives her freedom. It allows her to be something other than what the people are telling her to
And allows her to like step into the world, whereas like before she was like confined.
Locked
like
out.
yeah.
Why do you pronounce Illinois as Illinois?
You just said Illinois twice.
What? Explain yourself.
Is this thing even on? Or you just showing?